Good day, Limping Through Models, Nathan. We got a lot of content, we got to get through it, so let's get started. I did as much research as I could on stone foundation, and by as much research as I could, I just did a Google search on Google Images to see what I could come up with. And I had a pretty good idea in my head what I wanted to do. I wanted to start light with the base and then take it down darker and darker from there. Of course, making sure to add variation to the bricks that are laid within the wall itself. So, starting with some folk art camel colored paint, I start to paint around the foundation of the house, not making sure or not really caring about whether or not I get good coverage. I'll get that as I go along the process. Here's my first attempt to add some variation, adding a little bit of black to the camel color, and that was way too dark for my liking, so try again. I tried something a little lighter this time using some brown, I think raw sienna or whatever, and dropping that into the base color just to add a slight variation to what I already had painted on, because I just wanted slight variations. I'll eventually get darker and darker as I go along, so it doesn't matter if it's just a little bit darker. There's going to be other bricks that will be much darker, and then once we go with the wash, it'll all come together and look really nice. So now I'm quote-unquote randomly painting bricks, and by random I mean I'm doing a zigzag between upper bricks and lower bricks on the pattern, just picking out one about every inch and painting that, so it's not really that random. The paint that I mixed up earlier is not a complete loss, so I'm going to use that as the darkening agent for the bricks, and I think I do this probably about another 2 or 3 times, just adding a darker and darker paint to that last puddle there, and then painting I think about 4 different color patterns of the brick. And now we're heading to the wash here, which is the same messed up paint that I had before, but just watered down and diluted, and it's going to give it a nice gray color. So I tested out on a less noticeable part of the wall, and I like what I see, so I take that and proliferate it. After I have the wash on, I take a damp brush and brush that along the foundation, just to tone down what I've already done, because there were some dark spots here and there that I wanted to get rid of. And so far that's what the foundation is looking like. You can see slight variations, and that's the point, slight variations in the brick. And now I'm going to do a little bit of dry brushing of this brick with a, I think that's an antique white, and really put a minimal amount of paint on this brush here, and just go through and dry brush from the top down just to add subtle highlights to the brick. I don't know if you can see that really well, but that's the final product there with the dry brushing and everything, and I am happy with the result. Now it's time to paint the floor of the house, starting with the edges of the decking, which I had to be really careful doing because I didn't want to mess up all that fine work I just completed, making that stone pattern just the way I wanted. But I've painted enough DPM models in my time to know when to apply more paint than others. So after I'm done with that, I put a nice little top coat on the floor parts of the house, and it's looking really good right now. Good coverage so far, and the edges are cleanly defined, no paint on the stone, and an overall success right there. Now it's time to finish up the deck portions of the house. I had a really hard time trying to figure out which direction to put the house in relation to the elevation. Then I realized it was a top-down view, so I just have to deal with it or find another elevation, which I think I find a little later. But nevertheless, it's time for me to find all the wood pieces that go and make up the frame of the deck. And so I have to pick through and measure out the pieces, make sure I have the right ones, make sure I have the right amount. Turns out that once I got to a couple, I couldn't find any more in that one bag. And so thankfully, I have a whole nother model of the same one, of course, the failure, and plenty of unused deck pieces that I can add to this collection. and then build out the framing of both the front and the back deck. Carefully, I count out how many I-beams, or not really I-beams, or just plain old beams, whatever, however many beams I need for the front deck, and I decided to cut out the first one just because I'm impatient and wanted to get stuff done. But then later on I realized that I probably should mark these things out and then just do a mass measurement from there. And so that's what I did. Back to that first beam, I notch it on all sides just to make sure I get a nice flush cut, or as flush of a cut as I can with the X-Acto knife. And I do the same for all the other beams of that front porch. Once I had all those pieces lined up, it was time to start gluing those pieces, following the pencil marks on the underside of the deck, making sure that they're evenly spaced and that they're straight. Not really sure why I'm giving so much care to that. It's not like people will see the underside of this house, but you know what? It's in the instructions. This is a quote-unquote craftsman kit, and I'm just doing what I'm told. As I'm admiring my work, I realize that some of the joists actually stick out a little farther from the edge of the deck, so I have to take a knife and carefully shave those down so as not to have those protrude, which is okay because I'll eventually paint it all over. Now on to the back deck, doing essentially the same thing, marking with a pencil the spacing of the beams, which isn't as accurate as to the descriptions or the elevations on the drawing, because that back porch is actually, I think, a little bit larger than what's there, so I kind of had to make do. But once I had all the markings marked, I put the 3 beams in and I flushed down the edges, making sure everything is looking pretty flush here. I did notice one of the beams on the front was a little off center, so I decided to take that off and reapply it to make sure everything is, I guess, even. But then again, why am I worrying about that? I have no idea. I'm just doing what I'm told. I'm a simple man, I really am. And now I'm fashioning the cross members for the deck here. These actually protrude out from the front edge and line up with the corners of all of the parts that are on the underside of the deck. So I dab some glue on each joist and do the same for the other 2 joists that will eventually go in there. And the third one's being applied here. Guess what? I have to do the same for the back deck too. Only 2 for the back. That's all it needs. It's a small deck. Now this was the difficult part, where I had to figure out how to create the legs of the deck here. So I decided to just braze a X-Acto knife against the wood as it was stood upright, and somehow, some way, I was able to find those very faint lines and cut them out and place them in the appropriate places on the back deck first, and then on the front deck as well. And that's a completed deck structure with the footings and all the joists and cross members. It's looking good. It's also flush, and I'm really happy with that. Now it's the painstaking task of painting these joists here. Part of me wanted to do this beforehand, but part of me said, you know what? I just want to make this the most difficult model ever. So I'm gonna struggle to try and paint around all these joists, at the same time avoiding the brick. At the same time questioning, why in the world am I even doing anything to the underside on parts that nobody would ever see? Again, it's a constant struggle, but it's in the instructions, I'm doing it, and I'm just pretty basic like that. And this is the finished result right now. A finished foundation, underside painted, brick is painted, everything's painted, and I'm happy with what I see. I think we're ready to probably dirty this up a little bit. And dirty it up is what I did. I took some of that micromark stain that I have, and I gave an overall coat to the overside of that deck because I thought it was a little light for my taste, and then put extra emphasis on the parts where there was the actual exposed deck. And it's looking really good. It's looking like it's been well used, and I'm happy with that result. At the same time, I started to paint some of the roof pieces that go on the underside of the roofs. This is a piece that goes on the underside of the front deck, and then there's the piece that goes on the underside of the back deck. And then there's these 6 pieces that go on the edges of each of the gabled roofs to kind of hide and cover up the underside of those roof pitches, because if you don't do that, you can just see right into the model from the underside, or not even from the underside. If you're just slightly below the roof line, you'll be able to see right into the underside of the model. And here's what that would look like when it's in place. Once I had all 6 of these pieces in, what I had to do was kind of eyeball these new pieces in relation to the roof line, because some of those were protruding out, so I had to shave them at an angle to make sure that the roof laid flat whenever I put that on. And speaking of the roofs, here's a nice fun little part right here where I have to cut out each and every single roof piece. In this case, starting with the front porch and back porch. Get in a fresh blade, of course, because I don't want to be cutting with a dull blade, because that would just take way too much time. So I get my straight edge and I start cutting the pieces, and cutting and cutting and cutting. You know that drill, just cutting and cutting. Not sure if a pair of scissors would have done any better, but I didn't have a pair of scissors, so I had to do with the X-Acto knife. What do you know? More cutting. Man, this cardboard is thick. On to this tried and true method of using double-sided tape to affix the paper roof shingles. Before I do that, I mark the upward pitches of each of these roofs so as to know which way they go. Those will be covered once all the shingles are applied. Once I have the first lot of roof pieces covered with that double-sided tape, it's time to trim the edges. There's a lot of awkward angles here because this roof is really awkwardly shaped, but it's an interesting shape, and it's a shape I'm looking forward to somehow trying to build. The kit comes with your typical shingle paper that has that adhesive that's similar to that of an old envelope. You know, the one where you have to lick to stick and all that mess. But there won't be any licking happening here because I have that double-sided tape. One thing I like about Campbell kits is that they have these guidelines on the actual roof pieces. So you can actually line these shingles up to that guideline to ensure that you have straight lines, and you won't have to worry about having like diagonal or crisscross shingles. I like to use water to activate the lick and stick attributes of the shingles so that the parts that do not touch the double-sided tape get affixed to each other and hold on. And since I was on a roll, I figured why not just, do all the other roof pieces. Well, 3 days later, I got all the roof pieces completed, including laying the shingles, double-sided tape, cutting them out, and everything. It was rough. After I had fully recovered from doing all those roof pieces, I decided to add some details to the roof, including painting the underside of the visible parts of the roof the antique white. I break out some of my micromark stain because the instructions tell me that I need to stain the roof shingles. Now this is something I haven't done before. I usually just use paint to paint these sorts of shingles and then do some dry brushing here and there. But I decided to give it a try, follow the instructions, because I have done a great job of doing that so far. So I apply one coat of the stain to the roof pieces to see how that looks, and that's looking good so far. After I'm finished with staining the pieces, I lay everything down on a sheet of paper towel just to have a surface for me to place some weight on top of it, because the last thing I want to do is have the roof bow on me. I really want a nice flat roof because, hey, most roofs are flat. So what better way to use my senior yearbook and my kettlebell than to flatten these pieces? So after I think about a day or so, I go and have a look at everything to make sure everything is looking good, and it turns out that I sopped up all of the stain I had put on. So now I have to go and restain everything, which I guess is great. I mean, I was going to stain it again anyway, so it's not a complete loss. So it's time to finish up, I guess, my second coat on these pieces of the roof. And I start on the roof piece that I built for the front porch, and I'm not really liking what I'm seeing. So I consult the instructions to see if I did anything wrong, and apparently I did. I was supposed to take the ceiling and attach the post to the ceiling, and then attach the post and ceiling to the deck, and then attach the roof once the house is mounted to the deck. So I take the existing roof off of the ceiling and realize that the ceiling is not the proper size. So using some wood out of the old kit, I decided I was going to cut a new ceiling that was the exact size, using the outline of the deck area as my guide. Cutting the roof along the lines. Now I'm confident that I have a ceiling that is the exact fit that I need. And eventually I'll test fit that against what I have on the porch, and it's looking pretty good. I wish the cameraman, whoever that person may be, did a better job of showing this, but whatever. Now with the deck post in hand, the instructions tell me to use the elevations to determine what size the post is supposed to be. So using the front elevation, I'd go ahead and start cutting at it, and it's kind of hard to do with an X-Acto knife, so I try to cut each side, eventually getting down to where it's fully cut. But that's not very fun. That's not very quick, but there has to be something that's better than this that I know what I'm going to use. I'm going to use the chopper. So I take the piece I cut, use that as my template, size up where the chopper needs to be, and then I get to chopping all of the deck posts to the right size. As is the case with the wood pieces, the plastic pieces here don't cut straight down on the chopper, so I have to go in and sand down the edges to make them flat. With all the posts flattened as I want them, I go ahead and do a little bit of a test fit with the ceiling that I have in place and line that up to where it would eventually lay on the wall, and it's looking really nice. It's probably about a good 8 feet or so. And while I'm doing that, I realize I need to paint the underside, so I'll go ahead and throw some antique white on the underside of that ceiling just to give it a nice color. Part of the overall porch is the molding that goes across the top on the underside of the ceiling. I get the paint stick that I had those attached to and carefully peel these pieces off to save for later. Using the angles of the walls I had previously measured out, I draw where the posts should lay on the ceiling so that when it comes time to attach them, they attach evenly spaced. With a dab of super glue, I go ahead and attach the posts to the ceiling, creating that foundation for the roof that will eventually go on. Not today because, well, I'm done with roofs for now. Here's a shot of all the posts attached to the ceiling without the molding in place. That's going to be the next and tedious part of this build. My first thought was to take the molding and place it behind the posts, but it didn't really look right. So I bit the bullet and decided I was going to take the molding and space it between the posts. To do that, I had to measure it out and cut it to size, do some sanding here and there to get it to fit just right, and then affix it with some super glue on the bottom. Then drop it in between the posts. Once the molding is in place, I take some Plastruct and drop that in between the post and the molding, just to kind of give some additional adhesion to the plastic parts. And then once that's set, I go ahead and repaint those pieces just to give additional coverage and to replace any paint that may have gone away when using that Plastruct. And this is the finished product. It is looking really good, and I can't wait to attach that to my house. Grandma's house has reached part 5, and thank you for joining me on this journey here. One thing I need to let you know, again, I'm moving my channel to a new platform within YouTube, so I need you to subscribe to that. The link is in the description at the bottom here. Subscribe there, because starting with the build of the Wild Mouse roller coaster, that is going to be the first video on that channel. All other videos on this current channel right now are going to go away, be moved over to the new channel. So make sure you subscribe so you can get all the new videos that I put out. So with that, like, comment, subscribe. If you see my face here, go ahead and subscribe there. If you don't, subscribe here. And I will see you again next time.